The Bad Guys. Something of a bit of a sleeper release last year. It wasn't invisible, but I don't feel it got quite a lot of attention. Now, this was written by the same guy who wrote Idiocracy and Tropic Thunder. You'd think it'd be a bit edgier than what it is, but it feels like it's clearly aimed at kids, which makes sense as it's based on a children's book. I've watched this a few times now, and I have no doubt that it was never intended to be seen in 3D. Everything screams comic book. It likes solid lines, flat colors, and toon-style shading. It just looks like it's playing off of a page rather than inside of a three-dimensional world. When watching the stereo version, I frequently felt that something was just sort of off, not quite right. Not in any technical sense. I never felt that it was broken in any way. It just had a way of not looking right. But when I put on the flat version, it just sort of all came together, like the drawing suddenly had a cohesion that was just missing in the 3D version. In stereo, the primary thing that struck me was how flat the backgrounds were outdoors. When they were beside a beach, for example, it just appears to be completely flat, which is surprising, as with so little going on, I would imagine it would have been easier to push the sky miles back. Combined with the heavy lines used in the drawings and what it feels like is a pop-out book, where everything is springing out from a set page, which I found mildly unsatisfying. But to offer it a meager defense, this lower amount of stereo bandwidth did work well with the animation style. It had almost a stop-motion feel, and I'm not sure why that makes any difference, but the lack of smoothness seemed to draw my attention to the surface-most layer of the stereo, like the eye is unable to absorb the full picture and instead is left in a state of anticipation. It's looking for change rather than texture. The style was very similar to what I saw in Puss in Boots, The Last Wish, though Last Wish was a much more effective stereo experience. The Bad Guys is dealing with a much smaller and simpler canvas. Taking a quick comparison with the two-dimensional version, we see that it uses, or it appears to use, an earlier render of the film. The colors don't seem quite as polished. Now, I've said many times that there is no competition between flat and 3D movies. 3D is not the ultimate theater experience. It's an alternative, and that statement couldn't be more true here. The stereo version of Bad Guys is not the best version of this movie, but it doesn't invalidate the experience or mean it should be avoided. There are lots of fun 3D moments. For example, we get this Bond villain moment of a cutting contraption threatening our heroes, and who doesn't like a snake in 3D? Now, despite having many opportune moments, we never do get a popping right out moment with the snake, but it's still entertaining to see his long neck just sort of dangling out there. Some of the better stereo moments are of a car plowing through these gerbils. Now, it's a kid's movie, so we see the little guys shrug it off and get right back up. As it turns out, they are very hardy. One of the stranger aspects of The Bad Guys as a movie is there was so much that reminded me of other cartoons. It was the second 3D movie I saw this year that featured a mind-controlled horde of small, furry creatures. Also, the main character immediately brought to mind the fantastic Mr. Fox. The shark reminded me of the latest Squad movie. And there's an animated GIF that felt like a homage to a moment in the original Jurassic Park. The main antagonist, who they call a Professor Marmalade, reminded me of Gideon from Gravity Falls. And there's even an idea about horrible green farting that is visually identical from the last movie I reviewed, Happy Family. Having said that, I don't know what to make of all these similarities. Inspired or not, there's nothing particularly wrong with any of it. According to the filmmakers themselves, they were hoping to make a Quentin Tarantino movie for kids, which was the vibe the cafe scenes were going for. Were they successful? I'm not sure. At first it felt clever, but a bit sluggish, which might be better for its intended young audience, though later in the second half it does take off and is much better. I do suggest not spoiling yourself on the plot before watching, and see how much of the plot you can guess. All I'll add is that when you do watch the movie, notice that in this world, humans and animals coexist in society, but it is mostly made up of humans. And a fun game might be to ask yourself at the end what all the characters depicted as animals had in common.